The world knew Mariah Carey as America's songbird, the woman with the 5-octave voice who could shatter glass and melt hearts in the same breath. But behind the designer gowns and choreographed smiles lived a prisoner in a cage so gilded that no one could see the bars. 1993. If you were alive then, you remember when Mariah dominated every awards show, when her face smiled from every magazine cover, when it seemed she had conquered the music industry before her 24th birthday. What the cameras never showed, what the carefully scripted interviews avoided, what even her closest friends did not fully understand until years later, was that every smile was monitored, every friendship was vetted, and every moment of freedom was slipping away. 3 years into a marriage that the tabloids called a fairy tale, Mariah Carey was planning an escape so dangerous that one wrong move could destroy not just her career, but her life. But what she did in those final months, the secret operation she orchestrated right under the nose of one of the most powerful men in music, would remain hidden until the very end of our story. If you want to discover how one of the greatest voices of our generation broke free from a prison disguised as paradise, make sure to subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. The beginning looked like salvation. 1988. A struggling 18-year-old waitress with a demo tape handed her music to Brenda K. Starr at a party in Manhattan. Brenda, already an established artist, saw something special in the shy girl with the impossible vocal range and brought her demo directly to Tommy Mottola. As the newly appointed president of Columbia Records, Tommy had built careers and destroyed them with equal efficiency. When he first heard Mariah's voice on that tape sitting in his car after a corporate dinner, he made his driver circle back to the party immediately. By the time he arrived, Mariah had already left. It would take him weeks to track her down, but when he did, he made a promise that sounded like salvation. He would make her the biggest star in the world. Every word was true, but what he did not mention was the price. The grooming started immediately. Vocal coaches arrived at odd hours. Stylists replaced her entire wardrobe. Media consultants taught her how to sit, how to laugh, how to deflect questions about her personal life. Within 18 months, Mariah Carey released her self-titled debut album, Vision of Love, shot to #1. The album sold 9 million copies. She won 2 Grammy Awards. At 20 years old, she was living the dream. But somewhere in the whirlwind of success, the dream began to feel like surveillance. Tommy called her 12 times a day. His assistants always knew where she was. Friends who visited were questioned afterward about what they had discussed. At first, Mariah told herself this was normal, that this was what stardom required. But then came the night in 1991 when everything shifted. They were at a record label party, and Mariah was talking to a male backup singer about vocal arrangements. Just talking. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. When they left the party, Tommy did not speak to her in the car. The silence stretched across the 15-mile drive to their home. Once inside, he exploded. The questions came like bullets, and Mariah realized with growing horror that Tommy had not just been watching her at the party. He had been studying her, analyzing every gesture, every word, every smile. That night, something broke inside her, but she was not ready to admit it yet. Instead, she did what so many women in her position do. She convinced herself that his jealousy meant love, that his control meant care, that his obsession was devotion. The marriage proposal came in 1993, and saying no did not feel like an option. Tommy Mottola was not just her label president anymore. He was her manager, her advisor, her entire career. Saying no to marrying him might mean saying goodbye to everything she had worked for. The wedding was orchestrated like a Disney movie. 50,000 flowers, a castle venue in Manhattan, a dress that cost $25,000. Every major music industry executive attended. The press called it the wedding of the decade. Mariah's smile in the photographs was perfect, practiced, and according to people who knew her then, completely empty. The prison walls went up immediately after the honeymoon. The estate Tommy bought in Bedford, New York, sprawled across 51 acres surrounded by walls, gates, and security cameras that Tommy personally monitored. Mariah later described it as Sing Sing, the notorious maximum security prison, because that is exactly what it felt like. She could not leave without Tommy's approval. Friends had to be approved before they could visit. Phone calls were monitored. Her mother needed permission to see her own daughter. The staff reported directly to Tommy about everything Mariah did, everyone she spoke to, every moment she spent alone. When she wanted to visit the recording studio without Tommy present, the request was denied. The woman who sold 50 million records could not even drive herself to the grocery store. But the physical restrictions were just the surface. What Tommy did to Mariah's music was even more insidious. Every song had to fit the image he had created for her. Safe, wholesome, unthreatening. When Mariah wanted to incorporate hip-hop elements, Tommy refused. When she suggested working with producers outside his approved circle, he blocked the collaborations. When she wrote lyrics that hinted at her unhappiness, he had them rewritten. The irony was devastating. Mariah Carey had one of the most powerful voices in human history, but she was not allowed to use it to tell her truth. Every album was a negotiation. Every song was a battle. And slowly Mariah began to understand that she was not Tommy's wife. She was his most profitable product, and he would do anything to protect his investment. The breaking point came in 1995, but not in the way most people would expect. It was not a single dramatic incident. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small humiliations. Mariah was working on her Daydream album, and for the first time she found the courage to push back. She insisted on working with Jermaine Dupri and other hip-hop producers. She fought for a more urban sound on tracks like Fantasy. Tommy resisted every step, but the public's hunger for authentic Mariah gave her leverage she had never possessed before. When Fantasy became her 9th #1 single, and Daydream sold 25 million copies worldwide, Mariah realized something profound. Her success did not depend on Tommy's vision. In fact, her biggest triumphs came when she moved away from his rigid control. That realization was dangerous. It meant she no longer needed him professionally. But ending a marriage to Tommy Mottola was not like divorcing a regular person. It was like escaping from someone who owned not just your present, but your entire future. And Tommy, sensing that shift in power, began to tighten his grip in ways that went beyond anything Mariah had experienced before. What happened in late 1995 would haunt her for years. She was home alone, a rare occurrence, and decided to use Tommy's office computer to check her email. When she sat down at his desk, she noticed a leather-bound journal partially hidden under some papers. Curiosity made her open it. What she found inside made her blood run cold. Tommy had been keeping detailed logs, not a typical planner, but clinical documentation of her behaviors, her moods, even her menstrual cycle. There were notes about which producers made her too confident, which friends seemed to encourage independent thinking, which family members he needed to limit her contact with. There were strategies for keeping her isolated, techniques for making her doubt her own perceptions, plans for slowly eroding her sense of self until she could not imagine existing without his guidance. Reading those pages, Mariah understood with terrifying clarity that Tommy did not see her as a wife or even as a human being. He saw her as an experiment, a project, an asset to be managed. And he had been documenting his methods like a scientist recording data. The most disturbing part was how calculated it all was. This was not jealousy or passion gone wrong. This was systematic psychological manipulation. And Tommy had been refining his techniques for years. But that discovery gave Mariah something she desperately needed: information. Knowledge of his tactics meant she could start countering them. She began documenting everything herself, keeping her own hidden journal, recording every incident of control, every threat, every moment when Tommy's mask slipped. She was building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for a battle she knew was coming. But she also knew that documentation alone would not be enough. Tommy had too much power, too many connections, too many ways to destroy her career if she simply walked away. She needed leverage. She needed proof that she could survive without his empire. What she planned to do was so dangerous that thinking about it made her hands shake. But first she had to survive 1996. The obsession got worse. Tommy installed additional security cameras throughout the Bedford estate. Staff members were instructed to keep more detailed logs of Mariah's activities. Her phone was tapped, though she would not discover this until years later. He began showing up unannounced at recording sessions, at meetings with her publicist, at lunch with her mother. There was no escape, no privacy, no moment when she could simply breathe without feeling his presence. Friends started pulling away because spending time with Mariah meant being interrogated by Tommy afterward. Her world was shrinking, and Tommy was tightening the noose with every passing week. By December 1996, Mariah was suffocating. Something had to change, or she was going to break completely. In early 1997, Mariah made a decision that would either save her or destroy her. She could not tell anyone. Not her mother, not her siblings, not her closest friends. The isolation was suffocating, but the stakes were too high for honesty. She started making plans, careful calculations, strategic moves that would need to be executed with perfect precision. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, one suspicious behavior could alert Tommy, and if he knew what she was planning, there was no telling what he might do. She began therapy, which gave her a legitimate reason to leave the estate regularly. She started claiming she needed more medical appointments, more meetings with her publicist, more time to clear her head and focus on her music. Tommy was suspicious, but therapy was something he could understand, something that fit his narrative of Mariah being fragile and in need of guidance. She started rebuilding relationships with people Tommy had isolated her from, carefully, subtly, making sure he did not notice the pattern. She met secretly with lawyers at hotels far from Manhattan, always alone, always using cash for everything so there would be no paper trail. She was preparing an exit strategy, but she had to move so slowly, so carefully, that even she sometimes wondered if she would ever have the courage to go through with it. And then there was the other plan, the dangerous one, the one that could either prove her independence or hand Tommy the ammunition to destroy her completely. What she was planning would require a level of deception that terrified her, but the clock was running out. In March 1997, Tommy confronted her about unexplained absences. Where had she really been on Thursday afternoon? Why was the security log showing gaps in her movements? Who was she meeting with? Mariah stayed calm, told him she was seeing a therapist for depression, which was partially true. She had started therapy to process the trauma of her marriage. Tommy did not believe her completely, but he could not prove she was lying. What Mariah did not know was that Tommy had his security team investigating her movements, tracking her car, compiling reports on her activities. She was walking a tightrope, and one wrong step would send her plummeting. The actual escape happened on a Tuesday in May 1997. No dramatic confrontation, no packed bags, no final speech. Mariah simply told Tommy she was going to a doctor's appointment, got in her car and drove straight to her lawyer's office where divorce papers were already prepared. By the time Tommy realized she was not coming back, the papers had been filed. The woman who could not leave her house without permission had just filed for divorce from one of the most powerful men in the music industry. Tommy's reaction was exactly as terrifying as Mariah had feared. He launched what insiders later described as a scorched earth campaign. Private investigators were hired to follow Mariah everywhere. Industry executives received calls warning them that Mariah was unstable, unreliable, impossible to work with. Radio programmers were told her new music would not be worth playing. Tommy's lawyers filed motions designed not to resolve the divorce quickly, but to drain Mariah's resources and break her spirit. Every day brought new attacks, new humiliations, new attempts to make her regret walking away. He wanted her to come crawling back, to admit that she could not survive without him. For weeks, it seemed like his strategy might work. Mariah was exhausted, isolated, running out of money for legal fees. The media was turning against her, painting her as an ungrateful diva who had thrown away a perfect life. Her own label, Columbia Records, was still controlled by Tommy. Getting out of her recording contract seemed impossible. Finding another label willing to take her on seemed even less likely. Every door was closing, every ally was disappearing. Tommy had spent years building an empire, and now he was using that entire empire to crush the woman who dared to leave him. The divorce negotiations dragged through June. Tommy's lawyers demanded everything. They wanted rights to her future music. They wanted control of her image. They wanted her to admit publicly that she owed her career to Tommy's guidance. Mariah's legal team pushed back, but they were running out of leverage. Tommy held all the cards. He had the money, the power, the connections. What could Mariah possibly have that would make him negotiate fairly? Then on a Wednesday afternoon in late June 1997, everything changed. Mariah walked into her lawyer's office carrying a box. Inside were unmarked cassette tapes, detailed journals, photographs, and evidence that would shift the entire balance of power in the divorce negotiations. Her lawyer looked at the contents and asked a simple question. "When did you do this?" Mariah's answer revealed the most audacious secret she had kept during the final months of her marriage. This is what no one knew until years later. This is the operation that Mariah had been planning since early 1997. The secret that could have destroyed everything if Tommy had discovered it even one day too soon. Starting in January 1997, 4 months before she filed for divorce, Mariah had been conducting secret recording sessions, not at Columbia Studios where Tommy controlled everything, but at a small independent facility in Manhattan that most industry people did not even know existed. She would tell the security staff she was going to therapy appointments. Instead, she drove to that unmarked studio where a handful of trusted producers and musicians waited. Everyone who participated signed ironclad confidentiality agreements. The sessions were paid for entirely in cash, so there would be no paper trail. The tapes were stored in a safe deposit box that Tommy did not know existed, in a bank he had never heard of, under a name that was not hers. What Mariah recorded in those sessions was not just music. It was her insurance policy, her proof that she was more than Tommy Mottola's creation, her evidence that everything Tommy said about her needing his guidance was a lie. She worked with producers Tommy had explicitly forbidden her from collaborating with. She incorporated hip-hop and R&B elements that he had always rejected as too urban, too threatening to her wholesome image. She wrote lyrics that explicitly referenced her trapped situation, her desperate need for freedom, her determination to break free. The music she created in secret was everything Tommy had never allowed her to be. Raw, honest, vulnerable, unapologetically herself, and it was extraordinary. For 4 months, Mariah lived a double life that would have destroyed most people. During the day, she played the role of dutiful wife, attended industry events on Tommy's arm, smiled for photographers, gave carefully scripted interviews. At night, she was someone completely different. She was a woman planning a revolution, creating art that would prove she had never needed Tommy's empire. The stress was unbearable. She lost weight. She barely slept. There were moments when she almost abandoned the whole plan because maintaining the deception felt impossible. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered that journal, the clinical notes about strategies for controlling her, and she found the strength to continue. The divorce negotiations turned into a war, but now Mariah had leverage. When Tommy's lawyers argued that Mariah owed her entire career to his guidance, Mariah's team could point to music she had created without his knowledge or input. When they claimed she would fail without Columbia Records, the tapes demonstrated she was already making groundbreaking work independently. The settlement took months, but for the first time since she was 18 years old, Mariah was negotiating from a position of strength. The real revenge came in September 1997 when she released Butterfly. The album contained songs from those secret sessions, refined and perfected, along with new material that continued the theme of liberation. Everything Tommy had never wanted her to make. Personal, vulnerable, featuring collaborations with hip-hop artists. The lyrics explicitly referenced her escape from a controlling relationship. The album cover showed Mariah with a butterfly emerging from her hands, the symbolism so obvious it bordered on defiant. Music critics immediately recognized Butterfly as Mariah's artistic rebirth. But the real question was whether the public would accept this new version. The answer came swiftly. Butterfly debuted at number 1. It sold 5 million copies in the United States alone. Critics called it her most mature work. Songs like Honey and Breakdown became massive hits. Most importantly, the album proved those secret recording sessions had not been a desperate gamble. They had been the foundation for Mariah's second act. The years immediately following tested everything Mariah had fought for. She dated Derek Jeter, and Tommy allegedly tried to sabotage the relationship through his media connections. She left Columbia Records and signed with Virgin Records for $100 million. She moved to Los Angeles. In 2001, she had a very public breakdown while promoting her movie Glitter. The media declared her career over. Think pieces appeared claiming she should never have left Tommy, that she needed his guidance. For a moment it seemed Tommy had been right, but those critics fundamentally misunderstood what was happening. Mariah was not falling apart because she left Tommy. She was finally processing years of trauma, years of being treated like property. The breakdown was not the end. It was a necessary part of healing. The comeback began in 2005 with the emancipation of Mimi. The title itself was a declaration. Mimi was her childhood nickname. Emancipation meant freedom from bondage. Every song radiated confidence and hard-won wisdom. We Belong Together became her 16th number 1 single. The album sold 12 million copies worldwide. She won 3 Grammy Awards. At 35, she had achieved something almost unprecedented. She had fallen publicly and spectacularly, then climbed back to the top entirely on her own terms. But the most important moment came in 2009 when she spoke publicly for the first time about her marriage to Tommy. Until then, she had been diplomatic, never fully revealing what she had experienced. But something had shifted. She was remarried to Nick Cannon, someone who supported rather than controlled her. She was a mother. She was secure enough that Tommy's opinion no longer mattered. So she told the truth. She described the estate as Sing Sing. She talked about the surveillance, the isolation, the control, how Tommy monitored her phone calls, how security followed her everywhere, how she was not allowed to make simple decisions about her own life. The interview sent shockwaves through the music industry because Mariah was not just talking about her personal experience. She was exposing a pattern many had witnessed but never discussed. How many other artists had been controlled this way? How many other young women had been seen as property rather than people? Tommy's response was telling. He did not deny the surveillance or control. Instead, he claimed he had been protecting her, that the industry was dangerous. His defense essentially admitted to everything while trying to reframe it as concern rather than control. The public was not buying it. The most disturbing revelation came in 2020 when Mariah published her memoir. 23 years after the divorce, she finally revealed the full extent of what had happened. She wrote about finding the journal where Tommy documented his control strategies. She revealed that he had hired private investigators to follow her even after the separation, that he spread rumors about her mental stability to sabotage her Virgin Records deal. She described psychological tactics designed to make her doubt her own perception of reality. But perhaps the most chilling revelation was about those secret recording sessions. Mariah revealed that Tommy had suspected something. His security team had been investigating her movements, compiling reports. She only learned years later, when a former security guard reached out to apologize, that Tommy had been days away from discovering the secret studio sessions when she filed for divorce. If she had waited one more week, Tommy would have found out, and everything would have been destroyed. The story of Mariah Carey and Tommy Mottola is not just about a marriage gone wrong. It is about how an entire industry enabled and protected abusive behavior because the abuser was profitable. Every person at Columbia Records knew Tommy's relationship with Mariah was inappropriate. They saw the control, the monitoring, the treatment of a human being as property, but no one said anything because Tommy Mottola made them all very rich. His artists sold millions of records. His label dominated the charts. Questioning his behavior meant potentially losing jobs, careers, profits. So they stayed silent, and their silence made them complicit. Mariah's ultimate revenge against Tommy Mottola was not the divorce or the memoir or the comeback albums. Her revenge was surviving. It was building a career that lasted decades longer than anyone predicted, that survived public breakdowns and media ridicule and industry sexism, that proved beyond any doubt her talent had never needed his guidance. Today, Mariah Carey has 18 #1 singles, more than any solo artist except the Beatles. She has sold over 200 million records worldwide. Her song, All I Want for Christmas Is You, generates millions in royalties every year and has become a permanent part of global culture. She has achieved icon status that transcends any single relationship or collaboration. When people think of Mariah Carey now, they think of her voice, her music, her incredible resilience. Tommy Mottola, despite all his power, is now primarily remembered as the man who tried and failed to break Mariah Carey. The woman who once could not leave her house without permission now travels the world on her own terms. She makes her own business decisions, collaborates with whoever she chooses, answers to no one. She has been open about her struggles with bipolar disorder, refusing to let mental health challenges be used as a weapon. She has been honest about her healing journey, acknowledging that escaping the marriage was just the first step, that true recovery took years of therapy and hard work. She has built a life that is messy and complicated and occasionally chaotic, but it is her life, lived according to her rules. That freedom is what Tommy Mottola tried to steal. The fact that she got it back, that she rebuilt herself after years of systematic control and manipulation, that she thrived instead of just survived, is the real story. Not the fairy tale wedding or the dramatic divorce, but the journey of a woman who refused to let anyone else define her worth. The five-octave voice that first attracted Tommy Mottola's attention was never his to own. That is the real betrayal at the heart of the story. Not that Tommy Mottola controlled Mariah Carey, but that so many people knew he was doing it and said nothing until she found the strength to save herself. The industry that should have protected her instead protected her abuser. Mariah Carey broke free not because the system helped her, but because she was strong enough to save herself despite the system working against her. And in doing so, she did not just reclaim her own life. She exposed the ugly machinery of control that had been hidden behind the glamour of the music industry for decades, and forced an entire industry to confront the price of its silence.